Now, it is go time on taxes. We should soon learn what is in the tax plans from each of the chambers of Congress as the GOP aims to pass tax cuts before the end of the year. We're in our nation's capital today with Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Spot News, we are standing by right now. The release of a tax plan from each part of Congress, the House and the Senate. They each have their own versions and visions for the tax cuts and reform for the American people. We're told the House Tax Writing Committee is making some final tweaks, and Republican senators are being briefed right now on their plan, which is expected to have some significant differences from the House proposal. The Senate will reportedly remove the federal deduction for state and local taxes. You know, you've been hearing about it. It's called SALT. It happens in high tax states like New York and California. And it will have more tax brackets than the House version. A short while ago, House Speaker Paul Ryan said he expects any differences between the plans to be hashed out in conference, just like they would any other piece of legislation. Watch.
We're doing this the right way. We're doing this regular order. And yes, the Senate bill is going to be different than the House bill because, you know what, that's the legislative process. But what's encouraging in all of this is, just as we discussed at the front end of this process, we have a framework that we established with the White House and the Senate, and these bills are being written inside that framework. But the House will pass its bill, the Senate will pass its bill, and then we will get together and reconcile the differences, which is the legislative process.
All right, able to join us right now. Senators I mentioned are being briefed on the Senate's tax bill. Republican Ron Johnson of the great state of Wisconsin is here. He's in the Russell Rotunda. Thanks so much for meeting with us right now. And I know this is a critical point, so I want to get right to the news that's being made on this. Have Republican senators come up with a bill that is very different than you think the House has? That's important to know.
Well, hello, Harrison. As Paul Ryan described, this is a process, and there are definitely going to be differences between the Senate's version and the House version. I mean, from my standpoint, I think the good news is we're pretty well unified in terms of what the goal of tax reform should be, and hopefully Democrats will join us in this goal. It's to grow the American economy. We haven't even come close to realizing the full potential of the American economy, partly because of overregulation, but also because of a completely competitive, particularly business tax system. So, again, we're going to work our way through this process, but it's exactly that, and we're at the very first early stages of it.
Yeah, you know, we get an opportunity to kind of go inside what's happening now, the process, because you've been kind enough to step out of that meeting, that briefing. What's the mood in the room? Because there's a lot of pressure to get this done now. The president wants a version from the House by Thanksgiving and this whole thing on his desk by Christmas. What's the mood?
Well, I think you're right. There's a fair amount of pressure. We weren't successful on health care, although that issue is not going away and we're still working on it. And so there's more pressure to actually deliver to the American people the kind of tax relief and a competitive tax system which will put more money in their paychecks, will provide some tax relief. So we're very focused on that. But again, my optimism springs from the fact that we're really focusing on the same goal, which is growing our economy and really realizing what America has to offer.
All right, you skipped past something, and I want to go back to it, health care. I think you're talking about the mandate portion that you thought you might get some language in. Talk to me about it.
Well, I'm at a disadvantage because I did step out of the meeting. We didn't get the JCT score. I don't have the complete outline. This was really more of a summary PowerPoint presentation. So, later this afternoon, I think we're going to get a very detailed summary of this. So I can't exactly tell you precisely what's in it, but I'm certainly supportive of the fact that we should repeal the individual mandate. CBO scores that as saving about $338 billion. That's some savings we can put to good use to provide more and more tax relief and more economic growth.
So I'm glad to hear you say something about the CBO score, because that means we can talk about a little more on the other side. So the House bill is being looked at, and the CBO score put it $1.7 trillion, adding to the deficit, which would mean, I think you're going to, on your side, need 60 votes. Is that the case?
No, I'm sure we're going to come in what our budget constraints were, $1.5 trillion. But Harris, you have to understand, that's scored on a static basis. We just need a slight increase, and not much of an increase in terms of economic growth, to completely increase and revenue to the federal government, replace that deficit on a static basis with dynamic growth and dynamic revenue to the federal government and to our economy.
All right. You know, the American people have heard you talk so much about this that they get a lot of this lingo. We're deep in this process now as we have just a few weeks till the end of the year. Static basis, so you think you can crunch the numbers and get that down so that you only need a majority. But if you don't, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says that you have not sought the input of a single Democrat. So you don't perhaps have the kind of relationship through the process to bring on Democrats, or do you, if you should need them?
Well, again, I can't talk for other members, but I've certainly been reaching out to other Democrats in terms of my own concepts, which would really make sure that business income, whether you're a pass-through entity or a C Corp, treated all the same. There are a lot of benefits to it. Right now, the Senate version does not include my concepts of this, but I'm always talking to my Democratic colleagues on a host of issues, whether it's foreign policy or whether it's tax reform, in concentrating on the areas we agree on, and I think we can all agree on growing our economy so that Americans have access to greater opportunity and more wages.
Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, we appreciate you stepping out of that Senate briefing today ahead of rolling out your version for taxes for the country, tax reform, the biggest that we might have seen since 1986 under Reagan. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
Have a great day.
You too. Meanwhile, President Trump may be on the other side of the world, as we know, because he's on his Asia tour, but he remains deeply involved in the tax negotiations underway on Capitol Hill. You can bet that that's true. According to the Wall Street Journal, the president told a group of Senate Democrats in a phone call, quote, "You're going to like the Senate's plan a whole lot more." We assume he means a whole lot more than the House plan. Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who helped set up that phone call with the president, says he wants a bipartisan solution to tax reform. Watch.
You can't do it from one side. The Democrats can't fix it without the Republicans helping them. And I would like to think the Republicans think that they can't fix it without the Democrats helping them. So we're looking at how do you help the working person? How do you help the small business person? Right. If you're going to assume that we're going to take on $1.5 trillion of debt, if you want us to take that risk, who gets helped the most from this risk that we're taking?
All right, let's get more information now as we bring in Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, who sits on the Senate's Tax Writing Committee, also a very important person to talk to on this day. Senator, thanks for being along. What does this version coming out of the Senate, I mean, you guys are being briefed on it right now, what does it have in it that has the president saying that Democrats will like it a lot more, and I assume what he's saying, than the House bill?
Well, I have no idea what the president's referring to. The concern that we have is that most of the relief goes to the highest incomes. Middle-income families get unpredictable relief. Some will pay more. And we're financing it still through borrowing, more borrowing. And the Joint Committee on Tax says at least $1.5 trillion of additional debt. That's what I think concerns us. I have not seen the specifics of the Senate bill. I heard Senator Johnson. I can assure you that Democrats and Republicans, we want to work together. We want a tax reform because we need it that will allow our nation to grow. But you don't do it by creating greater debt.
What are some of the other sticking points? I mean, you've had some Republicans say that they're going to sit on the sidelines for a bit before they commit to this. What's out there?
Well, in addition to the debt, I think the real concern is you find that most of the relief goes to the highest incomes, and that relief is permanent. Whereas in middle-income families, much of the relief is temporary in nature. At least that was the House bill. We'll see what happens in the Senate. So it's not fairly skewed towards the middle-income families, which need the help.
How do you fix it?
Well, I think you fix it first by doing what Senator Johnson said. Let's work together, Democrats and Republicans. Let's have a more open process. This is not easy. We're seeing that the Republicans are having to make changes because of unintended consequences. Let's give it a little bit more time. Let's work together, and let's see where we can come together.
So I'm hearing a little bit of a difference. Do you think you're going to need Democrats? Because, I mean, you are in the majority. And if you can get the debt portion of this down on the House side, there's a good chance you could do it just by yourselves. Or is that not the case?
Well, they're using reconciliation so they can pass a bill on a party line vote. I can tell you this, it'll be a better bill if there's a broader consensus, and it will be legislation that will be more predictable and stand the test of time. So I think it's in our government's interest and our economic interest for us to have a broader agreement on this bill and not to pass it on a party line vote.
Senator Cardin, you know, as you look at things like the SALT here on the East Coast and you have it on the West Coast, I understand that the Senate version would actually do away with that. That's going to hurt a lot of people, as I understand it, in high tax areas, and that's been a sticking point for both people in your party and Republicans. How do you account for not being able to deduct those numbers, federal and state taxes?
Right. Well, it's going to affect taxpayers in every state in the nation, not just on the East Coast and the West Coast. And it philosophically is wrong. You don't tax, put a tax on tax. The same taxpayers are paying state and local taxes that are paying federal taxes. And it's a matter of respect, not having double taxation. So it is wrong. It's going to affect, in my state, a significant percentage of our taxpayers. It's something that I hope we can fix as the bill goes forward, because it's something that is just wrong.
You saw Senators Manchin and Collins this morning, and they have formed this unity. It's part of a group that's always existed, I understand, on Capitol Hill. But, you know, I asked Senator Johnson about the mood on Capitol Hill. There's a lot of pressure, obviously, on Republicans to try to get this done. But the American people are standing by to see if they're going to get more of their money back from their paycheck. So there's pressure on Democrats, too, should you be called upon to be part of this process.
Well, I agree. I think we do need tax reform, but it needs to be focused on middle-income taxpayers. They're the ones who need the relief. And so much of this relief goes to the highest incomes, and most of that is permanent. So I think if we're going to be able to really live up to our commitment to the taxpayers of this country, let's concentrate on a bipartisan proposal that helps middle-income taxpayers.
All right. Senator Cardin, the great state of Maryland, a Democrat on our program today. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So for more on all of this, let's go to Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace, who's sitting right next to me for the very first time, so I'm super excited about that. We do this in New York. Rarely, but now I'm in your house, so thank you.
Welcome. We're happy to have you.
A couple of things that we learned from both those senators. What stuck out to you?
Well, what stuck out to me, first of all, is we still don't know what is in the Senate Republicans' plan. There had been talk that they were going to get a briefing at 11:30. It's only a couple of hours later, but still, there is a sense of delay. There's also talk about basically a whole new bill in the House, House Ways and Means Committee. They're going to have a manager's amendment, which is going to have large-scale changes. What this really says, to get to the bottom line, is they're having some problems here. They're having some trouble figuring out a plan that works, that doesn't blow up the debt, that does stay within the guideline of $1.5 trillion. And there are also some political problems. Let me give you one quick example on SALT, the state and local taxes that you're talking about. The Senate politically is talking about doing away with that because these states, these high-tax states like New York, like California, like Maryland, like Connecticut, they only have Democratic senators. So if Democratic senators are happy with that, that's fine, because that's not going to stop them from passing it. In the House, even in those high-tax states, there are Republican members of Congress. Yeah. They can't afford to lose more than 22 of them, or the bill goes down.
Well, and we saw that come into play as they were voting on budget reconciliation, because you lost 20 of those. We've had many of them on in the 1 p.m.
Two
hour.
more, it would have been dead.
Right. And by the way, Chris, I asked some of those that we had on the program, they did not vote in a block. So it wasn't like they were standing off saying, hey, you know, it looks like this thing's going to pass. Let's all go vote no, and we won't damage it. They were voting individually, which means it could have fallen on any of their votes if they had gotten up to 22. I think that's important to note. But the other thing, too, with SALT, you know, I've been studying up on what a sending state is. There are 14 of them in the union. And that means that you're sending more money to Washington than you're getting resources back. And so those states feel like they need to charge higher taxes, if you will, just to simplify it. I don't know how you bridge the gap until you start to really look at the fiscal responsibility at the state level.
Yeah, and look, I don't care if I'm an individual taxpayer in the state of California and whether or not my state is a net contributor to the federal government or a net taker to the federal government. I don't care. What I care about is my taxes. And the fact is that if I'm paying a lot of taxes, and I used to be able to deduct all of those taxes on my federal income tax, and now I can't anymore, that's a big hit. There are other things. Student loan interest, you used to be able to deduct that. Now you won't be able to. Medical expenses, now you won't be able to. For some people who didn't itemize the fact that the standard deduction is going to double from about $12,000 to $24,000 is a big advantage. But if you did itemize, this could be a big hit. This is very complicated, and all people care about is how this is going to affect their taxes.
Right. Okay. So approximately, according to a study that I've read about, 70% of Americans claim standard deductions. Now, they may not be as big as some of those in the higher tax brackets, but the average is 27,000 of them. So those deductions matter to a whole lot of people who aren't in that 1 to 10%.
Well, that's right. And particularly, I mean, take medical expenses. If you don't have big medical expenses and it has to be 10% of your gross income, well, you don't care about it. But if you do, and obviously medical expenses can be enormous, the ability to deduct that from your taxes is a big deal. And in the House bill, that would be taken away. That could be the financial ruin or survival for a family.
Do you have any idea specifically based on, and we haven't seen the plans, so we heard from Senator Cardin, and I didn't anticipate that he would know exactly, but do we have any idea what the president means when he says, well, Democrats like Senator Cardin are going to like the Senate version better than the House?
Well, I think that on some of the issues that you just heard Cardin and other Democrats talk about, doing better for the middle class, maybe not running up as much debt, he's saying that. But think about this, because remember what happened on repeal and replace of Obamacare, Harris, which was the president was there, he celebrated it when the House passed it, and then he was quoted as having said, you know what, it was a little mean. So yes, and how do you think Republicans who had taken this tough vote to now hear the president say, well, that bill they passed was mean? So I'm thinking to myself, if I'm a Republican in the House, I haven't even taken the vote yet, and the president is already saying, I think Democrats will like the bill in the Senate more. Why do I want to take a tough vote to pass something in the House that the president is already walking away from in the Senate?
Wow, it's a complicated question.
Look, this is going to be a soap opera. It's going to be perils of Pauline. It's going to be alive. It's going to be dead a dozen times. My guess is in the end, because they don't have a political alternative, they'll pass something. But it's going to take a while, and it's going to be very up and down.
All right. Chris Wallace, thank you so much. I'm going to brag about you a little bit. You have a big guest coming up this weekend, I understand. Who are you sitting down with?
I'm going to be talking to Kevin Brady, who is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, who is still supposed to come out today with a whole new tax bill. So we'll talk to him about the House bill, the Senate bill, and where the president is on all this.
Fox News Sunday, pop your corn and watch it. Check your local listings for when it airs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harris.
We are just getting started on Outnumbered Overtime Live from Washington, D.C. About 30 minutes from now, we'll talk to Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, about the Trump administration's push on tax reform, as well as the president's historic trip to Asia. And when it comes to the North Korea nuclear crisis, how should the president engage China and Russia to make them influential partners in dealing with Kim Jong-un? We will talk with one lawmaker on the House Armed Services Committee. OT is in D.C. Stay close.
The United States is committed to the complete and permanent denuclearization of North Korea. And I am calling on China and your great president to hopefully work on it very hard. I know one thing about your president. If he works on it hard, it will happen. There's no doubt about it. I'm also calling on Russia to help rein in this potentially very tragic situation.
That was President Trump, obviously, from earlier on the second day of his trip to China, part of his total trip to Asia, as he ramps up pressure on Beijing and Russia to more isolate North Korea amid the growing nuclear threat from that rogue regime, as we often call it. Let's bring in Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally, who sits on the House Armed Services Committee. Congresswoman, great to have you today. So the president speaking directly to Kim Jong-un, and people are saying that it's rather historic because he really used some strong terms right there to him.
That is so crucial. I was in the military 26 years, and deterrence theory, if you want your opponent or an enemy who is a potential existential threat, who is marching towards a nuclear capability to hit America, if you want them to be deterred from their action, you have to make sure that they think you are willing and able to take action that is so hard on them that they will change what they're doing. And so that message was certainly to North Korea, but also to China.
All right, so deterrence theory coupled with what else would work with Kim Jong-il? Because you have people who are arguing now, and you've heard it from Ambassador John Bolton. You saw it with Rex Tillerson. We're going to still, the Secretary of State, we're going to still try all of this diplomacy right up until the time when That's no longer
Absolutely.
an option.
We need to use all elements of our national power. So that's diplomatic, it's economic, and it's deterrence by military strength and the ability and the willingness, if we need to stop this threat from happening. We cannot let it happen. So if you look at what's happened since this administration has been in office, they have ramped up the sanctions. We've gotten Russia and China to vote on 2 rounds of sanctions at the UN Security Council. That is a big deal. China has in the past really played both sides of this. They say they're cooperating, but then they really like to have North Korea being a menace to the United States in the area. And so they've always been kind of out of both sides of their mouths. Now I think they're starting to realize that their, Frankenstein that they've created is out of control and is a threat to global security, regional security, and they don't want Americans on the Yalu River. And the implications of them continuing to get this nuclear capability are very real. So China has now agreed. You see the trade deficit has gone down. The imports are going down. They've made their own decisions after the Trump administration's economic sanctions that we've put on unilaterally as well to stop working banks with North Korea businesses. They're now realizing that this is so serious that they've got to get on board.
26 years in the military, undoubtedly you've seen some situations where diplomacy fell away and we needed to step up militarily. But do you feel like we still have some time? Because the rhetoric is such that, I'm sure you've been hearing what North Korea has been saying back. And plus they keep trying to brandish all of those missile firings and saying that there's another one coming back. So how do we kind of posture and yet also keep diplomacy as part on the table? Well,
I think President Trump and the administration are doing that through their diplomatic efforts, which are strong and ongoing, through these economic sanctions.
Important to be there now?
Absolutely.
You can't do it from home.
Absolutely. He's got being there and being on the peninsula and speaking directly to Kim Jong-un is a really big deal, and showing like we are willing and able to stop you from being this threat. And our military is ready. It's an awful option, don't get me wrong, but you have to see the whites of their eyes for them to maybe start changing their behavior. And it's got to be managed very carefully. But if our enemies and our opponents don't think that we're willing and able to address these threats, then they won't start changing their behavior. So we got to do it all. And our military is the best in the world. With our partners in our alliance with South Korea, we've got to make sure we stop this threat from happening.
All right. Real quickly, does he go to Russia? Yes or no? Should he?
Should he go to Russia?
Not to go to Russia, but meet with Putin, rather.
Putin has actually been, working around the sanctions, working directly with North Korea. He's critical, not as critical as China, but we've got to get them on board as well.
All right. Congressman McSally from Arizona, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Coming up, Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president on the historic trip and how the president is engaging world leaders to deal with the global crisis that is North Korea. So we'll go a little bit deeper on this conversation. We'll also talk about tax reform with Ms. Conway, and former DNC chair Donna Brazile dropped a bombshell. She's been doing that a lot lately with her claims about the Clinton campaign's influence within the Democratic Party. Now she's raising eyebrows again, this time on her role in leaking those debate questions. Remember that? Our power panel weighs in next. Stay close.
What I sought to do, Tucker, was to ensure that we had these issues on the table, and I made sure that our candidates, I didn't want them blindsided. That's what I admitted to. That's what look, what WikiLeaks put out.
That's the greatest spin I've ever heard. I didn't want them blindsided.
Hey.
Former interim DNC chairwoman Donna Brazile defending the revelation that she leaked CNN debate questions to Hillary Clinton, saying she also shared information with the other 2 Democratic Party candidates, Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley, so they wouldn't be blindsided.
I said last year that CNN never provided us with any questions. CNN never gave us anything in advance. What I sought to do, Tucker, was to ensure that we had these issues on the table, and I made sure that our candidates, I didn't want them blindsided. That's what I admitted to.
Let's bring in our power panel now. Mark Lauder is a former spokesperson for Vice President Mike Pence. Brad Woodhouse is a former DNC communications director, and now he's the campaign director for Protect Our Care. I'm a little confused. First, she says that she didn't get the questions, and then she says, but if she did get the questions, she made sure that she gave them to everybody.
Well, look, I think what we saw in WikiLeaks, which only leaked the email that she sent to the Clinton campaign, was that she told someone on the Clinton campaign, and according to her interview last night, she also spoke to the O'Malley and Sanders campaign, that there was going to be a question about what the candidates would do about the situation in Flint. Lo and behold, the debate was in Flint, Michigan. They all knew they were going to get that question. I've always thought that this whole thing was much ado about nothing. She told the campaign they were going to get a question about Flint for a debate that was in Flint.
I want to just praise Donna Brazile for lifting the shroud of conspiracy off of the Clinton campaign's collusion with the DNC to rig the election for her against against Bernie Sanders. I mean, that's really where we've seen this book in the revelations is the amount of rigging behind the scenes. And really, it started back in 2008. Remember, she front-loaded all the primaries to win the election back in 2008, and it backfired on her when Barack Obama then caught fire early, and she didn't have enough time to come back. And we saw it again in 2016.
Brad, that's pretty succinct.
Well, let me speak to this, because I ran a super PAC that supported Hillary Clinton beginning in the primaries in 2015. I'm also the former communications director of the DNC. I spent 5 years there. I know exactly what was going on during this period of time. And the Clinton campaign, no matter what MOU or whatever else they signed, they didn't get their way at the DNC.
So are you saying that Donna Brazile is not telling the truth?
I'm saying Donna Brazile brought out in her book an MOU that said that the Clinton campaign got certain considerations related to staff for the general election. But I know for a fact the communications director they hired, that the DNC hired, was not the choice of the Clinton campaign. The general election director that the DNC hired was not the choice of the Clinton campaign. It did not work out in practice. And let me add one other thing. If you believe that they were rigging the election, they let Bernie Sanders stay in the race.
It doesn't matter what I believe.
No,
it only matters what the voters believe.
I'm saying the royal you. If you believe that they rigged the election, they let him stay in for 50 states and carry all of
I saw Bernie Sanders at the DNC convention. This was a guy who was walking around with a straight line emoji emotion on his face. This was tough for him. He knew whatever he knew behind the scenes, and it played out the way it played out. And now you have somebody who's not just a woman who wrote an interesting book. This was the interim chair who had a whole lot of power going into that job.
And Senator Warren even admitted on TV last week that the system apparently was rigged. And they did sign an MOU beyond just fundraising coordination that did give them control over who was going to be hired, strategy, spending, those kinds of things before the actual primary process was completely over.
It did not work out in practice. It didn't work out in practice.
Yeah, but was everybody else signing memos of understanding the way that she was? Because if they weren't, then it was unfair.
Let me say this.
The
Clinton campaign did the right thing. You want to exert your influence to win an election everywhere that you can. The DNC maybe should not have entered an MOU, but they were desperate for money, and what they got out of it was money that funded caucuses that Bernie Sanders went on to win.
Is this a shiny object now? Is this a huge distraction? Because, Democrats are, like yourself, are having to defend against a woman who's written a book who had quite a bit of power. And I don't know how much of it you saw with Tucker Carlson last night, but it was a back and forth.
I saw the whole thing. Let me say this. If you look at what happened in Virginia, New Jersey, Maine, Georgia, New Hampshire, and Florida on Tuesday night, this is not a distraction for the Democrats. The Democrats routed the Republicans despite this issue that's come up.
I mean, I would disagree with the term rout. We won all 5 special elections in Congress, and you had a Virginia that has voted for a governor who's opposite of the president in every election since 1977 -1, and anyone who would actually say New Jersey is a bellwether state would be laughing at themselves.
We won 3 deep red.
All right, you guys are going back and forth
in Georgia.
I want to jump back in with the situation though, because this is not the only, but perhaps the biggest fundraising arm, and those fundraising numbers right now for Democrats are woeful. And so what do you do with that, Mark?
Well, obviously, the Democrats don't have a message right now other than resist. That's the only thing they stand for. They've raised paltry money off of that, where the Republicans are out there talking about passing tax reform, providing middle-class tax relief, repealing and replacing Obamacare, and as we're seeing on a world stage right now, taking on our enemies, bringing the world together to confront the challenges that are North Korea that have been kicked down. The can has been kicked down the road for 25-plus years. This president's talking about doing something. Republicans are united behind that, and they're moving forward, not only with their wallet,
Look, Tuesday night says that the Republican message is fake.
I'm going to keep you right here. We'll talk about it. Stay close. We're back with the Power Panel now. We have Mark Lauder and Brad Woodhouse, and we're going to just kind of wrap it up here with last thoughts, because I'm curious to know what's happening at the DNC with regard to Donna Brazil's book. Have you reached, because you're friends with her, have you reached out to her? You're saying that what she's said is not quite true. So I'm curious, if you told her that?
What I'm saying is that she has a judgment and interpretation based on what she saw. I have a different judgment and interpretation based on the information I have. That they, the Clinton campaign, and I was communicating with them every day.
She talked about the culture being like a cult.
Look.
That's offensive if it isn't true.
Well, look, I went to Brooklyn many times. I didn't think it was a cult. I thought it was a typical campaign experience. I don't know what she experienced, but her judgment and interpretation is different than mine. I know the Clinton campaign was frustrated with the DNC throughout the course of the campaign. I don't think that they were running the DNC
you had,
to the detriment of Bernie Sanders.
And I don't mean to leave you out here, Mark, but I want to press in a little bit. I know I'm kind of I'm probably asking some questions you have. But you had a little bit of a Saturday night massacre situation over at the DNC where you fired some people. I know the finance director's gone, and that's not tied to the Donna Brazil book necessarily, but it is tied to those fundraising woes. I want to get you in here.
Well, I think it's just showing that we are seeing that the Democratic Party is tripping all over itself on the Hill, in the DNC itself, and in states across the country without a message other than to resist our president and the growth that he's bringing, and denying the fact that we've got economic growth, through off the charts, low unemployment, record stock markets, those kinds of things.
So how do you turn that into a bigger win night, a bigger victory night than what you just saw a couple nights ago? Because there is kind of a sweet spot right now that may not always exist. I mean, you're going to fundraise off of Tuesday, I would imagine. As
you are just starting to see. I mean, the president has been in office now for about 10 months, not even a year yet. We've still got tax reform out there. It's going to happen before the end of this year. I'm very confident of that. And when Republicans go back to their districts next year, as we head into 2018, they'll make the case that we need more Republican support to be able to do the even bigger things like repeal and replace.
We're going to scoot, and I'll have to bring you back. I know you've got a final word, but I'll bring you back. Thank you, gentlemen. Dueling tax reform plans now emerging between House and Senate Republicans. Republican House lawmakers are about to reveal the changes that they have made. We understand they are big to their tax bill, as their Senate colleagues are about to unveil their own plan. We expect that to happen today. So how will the White House get both sides within their own party together bicamerally on the Hill to make sure legislation gets to the president's desk? Counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, is in the building. She joins me.